Word up, Tyler from Deadstring Audio with another drum video. That's right, 2 back to back. So we're crazy, but we love drums. Today we're going to be mixing Perfect Drums. Not going to talk too much about shell choices because just kind of did that on the fly. But we're going to be going through some more fun processing you can do on drums. Probably going to get into some more advanced stuff today. Let's just kind of listen to how this sounds out of the box with all processing turned off. And then I'll show you with all processing turned on, and then we'll kind of talk about how we got there. So this is just out of the box. And then this is the sound we're going to be working towards. Going for a real fat sound. Sorry, I probably just smacked the shit out of that mic stand. So as usual, we're probably just going to start with the kick drum. All of this is feeding into a drum bus. We'll talk about that momentarily, but we are getting some compression and some volume from our busing. But let's just start here with the kick. This is just our raw kick. May not sound like a lot, but if you have a good ear, you can notice that it has really clean low end, a really cool click characteristic to it. It's almost metallic, which is perfect for metal drums in my opinion. So let's kind of talk about what we did to get to this result. Started out with some transient shaping, didn't have to do a whole lot. Just some slight attack. We're actually cutting just a little bit of sustain. I'm going to kind of do this piece by piece. It's almost not even noticeable enough to even talk about. Just doing some slight treating to that transient. And then on the kick, surprise, surprise, we're cutting mids. It's a metal kick drum. Those mids need to get cut. Probably don't always need to go this ham, but in this particular case, I liked what I was doing. So this is without it. This is with it. So my reasoning or my thinking behind this specific EQ is I'm wanting to cut some of those mids because I want the low end and the high end to be more focused and the way you perceive it with your ears. So when we cut mids, even though the bass and treble aren't actually getting louder, it feels like they are just because those mids aren't masking or combating in any way. So I wanted the sub to be brought up a little bit and its perceived loudness. I also wanted to tame a little bit of that high end because it's very, like I said, like metallic sounding. I still wanted it there, but I wanted to tame it a little bit. Let's go back to raw without this EQ. With it. It's a lot more low end focused. And again, we aren't even adding anything. We're cutting. But its perceived volume is changing when we're cutting these frequencies. Frequencies that were already there that aren't being combated by other frequencies are now more audible. So with this move, I was just trying to get that low end up a little bit. Like I said, we're not boosting any low end, but because of the way we're cutting, that low end seems to be coming through more now. And then, yep, shaped up some high end. Doing some pretty standard compression. This is actually the default. I'm pretty sure this is a VCA style. Yep, VCA compressor. Pretty sure these are just the default attack and release settings. I just feel like it's perfect for kick drums, just the way that this is. Just a slow attack to let that transient through, and then a fast release to let go of it. pulled down the threshold so I was getting a healthy amount of gain reduction. Oh, let's turn this on. Hitting about between 5 and 7, which is usually where I'm aiming for. Brought up the makeup gain to kind of match the original volume. So this is without compression. Let's go to a kind of a faster part. And then with compression. It almost just feels like it's pushing air. It's adding punch and impact. It's usually kind of what I'm trying to achieve with my stages of compression on kick drum, is just adding punch, getting consistency if you need it. In this case, it's fake drums. The consistency is going to be there, or you could program it to be there. So really, I'm just trying to get a punchy characteristic out of this compressor. Adding just a very slight amount of top end and low end with this custom EQ. This is without that EQ. This is with that EQ. Just kind of brings up the low end and the top end just a little bit. I like pairing that with the compression because both of those are trying to achieve similar things. Just lifting it up and adding some punch to it. I'm actually using a mid-side or a mid-range EQ on this Pultec style. And it looks like we're actually using it to dip around 3K. So this is with it. This is without it. So with this move, kind of trying to do what we were trying to achieve with this EQ move, just taking it one step further. We're dipping about 4 dB of 3K. With these Pultec style EQs, they just have very, I don't even know how to describe it. They just have a very interesting EQ curve to it. So I just threw this on there again, trying to achieve what I was doing here, but instead of just taking this even further, I like to do things in small stages. So if my moves here, if they weren't enough to achieve what I wanted, but it got me closer, I'll call it good there, and I'll try to use a secondary plugin to take that same philosophy further if I need to. So just doing everything in small stages until you get it where you want to be, instead of big moves that are just going to completely change your sound. So again, with this one, we're cutting around 3K. Just wanted to emphasize that low end a little bit more. Also kind of gives it a more scooped feel. Because it's off. Looks like my decapitator doesn't want to load. Let's figure out what's going on with that. Might even just re-add it on there. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to have to redial this back in, but we can kind of go through why I use saturation on my kicks. Love Decapitator. This is a old version. So it doesn't have its own dedicated. I can't even remember what they added in the newer versions. I've never really cared to upgrade. But with my idea behind this move that I'm about to do is we're really going to focus on the kind of low and upper mids and just kind of, we cut a bunch out, but now we're going to kind of add some back that are saturated, and it's going to really beefing up the kick. So I'm going to have this be super exaggerated to start out. Just 'cause I want to hear what this plugin's doing. And then once we get it dialed in, we will bring down the mix to a good level. So that's a good tip for pretty much any plugin you're doing. Don't be afraid to go super exaggerated with it, just so you can hear what's happening, and then back it off when you got a good sound dialed in. So I'm going to go crazy with it. These styles down here are just different circuits. They're going to give you just a little bit different flavor of saturation. I really like E and A. Cool. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. We're clipping it like crazy. And then we go back to dry and slowly bring it in. Let's hear that with without it. And with it. Just kind of adding some more of that mid-range that we were cutting out. We're kind of adding it back in, but in a very well saturated manner. This next tip, I've actually learned this from a producer called, I'm gonna probably butcher his name, Lance Prince. I'm not sure. He's recorded bands like Alpha Wolf, Diamond Construct. Very, very good producer. Kind of picked up this trick from him. I fucking love it. Don't know why I never really thought to do it earlier, but we're using a multi-band compressor. We're bypassing every single band but this low mid one here, and we have it set to 60 hertz up to about 100. Could probably even go slightly higher, but I wanted it a little bit more focused. And then we're boosting 4 dB. And it's going to very quickly add some low end and then take it away. So we'll play it without it real quick. And with it. That's pretty drastic. I mean, if you're not using headphones right now, first of all, what the fuck are you doing? But secondly, it's subtle, but it's so powerful at the same time. It really adds that punch that I'm always looking for in my kick drums. So yeah, just the way we have this set up is we're targeting a very specific frequency range, kind of where the fundamental of the kick is. We are boosting it about 4.5 dB, a pretty fast attack time and a very fast release time, just because we want it to be quick and snappy, gets in and gets out quickly, but just adds that low end punch. So just one more time, let's hear that kick drum with no processing. Sounds good. Just a little flubby and not too flattering on its own, but it's everything you need's there. And then with all that processing. Really, really punchy, excuse me. Let's move on to the snare. Let's hear the raw version first. Process. So one trick I almost find myself doing every single time. Very rarely do I opt out of it. I try to get 2 snare tracks, one from the original and then one as a supplemented sample. And I really like to get low end out of one and high end out of the other. But I still have one as the dominant sound. It's going to be the vast majority of what you're hearing. Just if we need some more high end and some more crisp, we supplement that with another snare sample. Well, let's kind of talk about what we did here. As always, started with some transient designing. Very slightly cutting attack, just barely. And then cutting about 20% of the sustain. So this is with that transient designer. Let's hear it on this fast part. And then this is without it. Without it, there's a lot of that woo 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 woo, that ring woo woo. God damn it. So instead of trying to like EQ that out, just cutting some of that sustain so it doesn't hang around as long. And then we went here and then tried to cut it out. Let me bypass this. bypass all of these real quick, just so we can kind of hear what the initial EQ move is doing. Trying to beefing it up, carve out some problematic areas. Like this is probably a little aggressive. It just sounded good at the time. Yeah, like I don't even think we need that. Just trying to add some more beef and some more low end with this move. The way I have this cue set up here is it right at the peak of this curve, it's boosting a kind of narrow band. And then if you look at dips down, this is all part of the same EQ shape. I can just kind of control those peaks with this little slider here. I liked the low end it was adding, but I didn't feel like we needed all of that. So everything below like 40 is getting rolled off. I liked the ring, but I wanted to tame some of it. Turn these back on. Without it. With it. So obviously that ring is still there. Like I said, we're not trying to get rid of all of it. We're just trying to tame it up so it's not so in your fucking face. Similar to the kick, we are compressing again. We just got the default attack and release. I love the way this compressor sounds on drums, just right out of the box, the way it is. Just compressing. We turn these off, so it's just the compressor. We're hitting just over 7. Added gain for makeup. Oop. Some more, looks like we're just doing a top end boost on this one. Just to kind of tilt the EQ curve more towards the treble side. And then some saturation. Without the saturation. And then width. You could even probably bring this input down just a little bit to match that original volume. It's really accentuating the low frequencies and the low mids in a really pleasant way. I say that as I immediately cut them on the next one. Might even bring some of that back in. We'll see how it sounds in the context of everything. Let's hear how that sounds. See, I feel like we could even bring some of this back. The body is really good. The low end's pretty good. So now we can kind of talk about this other snare track. This is my crack, sizzle, and pop snare. All 3 of those elements, if I need either of those, it's going to be coming from a move like this. Just using Trigger 2, the free version, Snare 11, got all 3 samples on there and just kind of blended them together. Absolutely cranked the tuning on all 3. Brought Saturn on here for no gating or anything. We're doing just straight saturation. Just some warm tape on the mids and treble frequencies. I didn't want it to be masking any frequencies from the original snare, so I'm really just trying to get that top end. And I'm doing a 1176 style compressor just to really even it out. Kind of a slow attack. And it actually looks like we're not getting any gain reduction. Oh, that's another thing. I like to have my snares in mono. And before I had this plugin on there, it is a stereo field snare. There's one in each speaker. I force it to mono, so it's dead center. And then let's hear that with this snare. We're getting that crack and that sizzle from our snare sample. So we're focusing the original snare on the body and the low end and the punch. Then we're using another snare sample to add high end crack and sizzle. And then for toms, I hardly ever do much to toms at all. I just try to get them to sound good from the source, no matter what program or I'm using or if we're recording live. It's just going to be about really trying to nail that sound from the get-go. So as you can see, boosted some low end, took out the ringing frequency. After the tom is hit, it hangs around. Let's turn off this gate as well. So let's hear it just completely raw. Then with this EQ. Not a whole lot happening, just cutting some mids, some treble, boosting some low, trying to cut out some of that resonance. And then this next move is very simple. Compressing it. Oh, look at that. It's the same move. Same attack and release times. Hitting about 5 dB of gain reduction. And then I have a gate on there just to cut off that ringing from happening any more than a couple seconds. Floor tom's probably going to be the exact same story. Very similar move, cutting some mids, not as egregiously, boosting some treble and some bass. Let's hear how it sounds raw. Then with that EQ. Again, just adding some low end and some high end. Very slightly scooping the mids. Our compressor, same settings as before. Hitting about 7 dB of gain reduction. Oh, almost 10. I usually try to aim between 5 and 10, whatever sounds best. That ring is really hanging around, so we're doing that same gating move. Still want it to sound relatively natural. But it gets out of the way for the rest of the kit to come back in, especially on these faster parts. I'm then routing both of my toms to a verb track. Looks like I'm just doing a room emulation. I could do this on the whole kit, but we already have a room mic. So for this, I just kind of wanted to add some depth to the toms themselves. So let's kind of take a listen to what this sounds like. So this is without that tom reverb. And then with it. It adds almost some top end to it, which is nice because I like to get attack out of my toms from outside sources other than just trying to boost frequencies. Because I don't, for me personally, whenever I try to boost frequencies on toms, I end up just going down a rabbit hole of trying to be like, oh, I actually hate this frequency. Let's cut it. Oh, I hate this frequency too. Let's cut it. So to keep myself from doing that, I like to do tricks like this to try to get high end elsewhere without actually boosting anything. So we're just adding some verb on there. Just to add some attack and cut. Also to give it some more dimensionality. Overheads are probably going to be pretty simple. Let's look at what we're doing here. Don't really need that. Looks like we're just doing some slight compression. It's 4-1, but we're only hitting about, looks like a max of 3 gain reduction. Most of the time it's only hitting 1. Just some very slight compression. You don't want to go too heavy with compression on cymbals. Otherwise, things will start getting really wishy-washy and unintelligible pretty quickly. So if you are going to compress your overheads, don't be afraid to, but just kind of keep an eye out for if you're getting weird phase things are kind of ducking in and out of volume, or just becoming kind of a washed out sound. You don't really want that. So doing some slight compression just kind of adds some excitement. This is another EQ, just adding some top end. I'm not sure why we're doing that steep of a bell curve. Let's tighten that up. Cutting out some low end, cutting out some upper mids into, yeah, I'd say that's upper mids. So not doing a whole lot to overheads. Rooms is where things are going to get interesting. The way I like to set up my rooms, especially in programmed drums, is I like to have my room mic be almost only shells. There's going to be some cymbal in there, but it's going to be very, very quiet in comparison to the shells. Granted, that's kind of hard to achieve in real life if you're miking up a real kit. But since we're not using a real kit, we can kind of break the rules of reality a little bit, you know? That's fun. I want my shells to be explosive. I don't want the cymbals in the room mic to be combative with the cymbals in the overhead. So I'll get all my cymbal information out of the overheads, and then rooms, I'm going to use that to supplement the rest of the kit and add some more characters to it. And sustain. I cannot say sustain. Holy. Well, let's take a gander at this raw room. Just a hint of kick drum, a lot of snare, decent amount of tom, and some pretty quiet cymbals. I might even take this a step further and bring this cymbal room down quite a bit. We're doing some EQ, boosting some low ends. Let's turn all these off so you can only hear this EQ. Doing a similar move we did to the snare, but we're actually going up to 60. Just trying to tame that kick that is feeding into it a little bit. Taming a resonance frequency and just a slight top end boost. Another stage of compression. We did change the attack time, it looks like. Trying to think of why I would do that. If you do a slow attack, more of that transient's going to come through and be less affected. So I'm assuming my thought process was we're trying to supplement the original transient of the close mic snare. So we're gonna duck the transient in the room just a little bit. So it's only adding to the tail end of it, not the initial hit. Let's hear what that sounds like. Looks like we're going a little heavy on that makeup gain, so let's back that off a little bit. That's pretty sick. Put my phone on mute, I apologize. Okay. Just did some compression. Looks like we're going to probably be doing some gating. Yep, we are kind of saturating the top end, but we're also gating it. Let's hear what this sounds like with it on. So yeah, I'm using this dynamics knob on each frequency band to kind of gate out some of that cymbal bleed, just to give it somewhat of a realistic feel. We want some bleed there. Helps tie the whole kit together. Not doing much gating on the actual fundamental of the snare, which is about right here. Saturating at a pretty healthy amount. So we're just gating the upper mids and treble. Cut out some of that cymbal bleed. Boosting and cutting some lower mids. Let's hear how this kit sounds like without this room. With it. And it's adding a lot of sustain to it. And an actual mix, you might have to play around with how much of that room is actually cutting through. But one trick I find essential is volume automating your room track. So I click this little track envelopes button here, pull up my track envelopes volume. That will reset your fader back to 0. But if you see here, even though this volume fader here says 0, if I hover over here on this volume line, it actually is sitting at negative 0.4 dB. And then down here, it's at negative 10 dB. But let's take a look at why we're doing that. So on big open parts, sorry, I keep kicking that mic stand. Big open parts, you can kind of get away with having long amounts of sustain. But faster parts, if I mute this envelope here, listen to this fast part, and then I'll bring in that volume automation, and you'll see how much it cleans it up. And then with it, very explosive, sounds really cool, but once you start adding guitars and bass in there, it's just going to become a jumbled mess very quickly. So I am automating a volume cut. It's cutting a whole almost 10 dB. So it's still there, but it's not in the front and center like it is when the kit's got room to breathe. And as you can see, when that part ends and the kit slows back down, our rooms will come back in. So get creative with your volume automation on your rooms. Different sections of the song are probably going to require different amounts of room sound. So unfortunately, it's not just a set and forget thing. You're going to have to play with it. Different sections, like I said, are going to require different amounts. Our drum verb is essentially kind of doing the same thing the room's doing, but kind of doing it in a more exaggerated way. So let's listen to with this drum reverb without any processing. And then with processing. Actually not a big fan of that much kick in the verb, so we're going to bring that down probably about 4 dB. Let's take a look at what we're doing here. Brick walling right below the snare, just trying to get out all this kick information here. Doing a lot to get rid of that kick. Let's bring it down even more. Cool, so now we can probably bring this back up, since that wasn't needed. Doing some very slight gating on the top end. Very slight. Doing some small amount of saturation. I think this is just what Saturn is by default. It's about 20%. I'm saturating it just to play with the sustain time. And I have a very slow release, so it really hangs around. So that's our whole kit. Let's take a look at this bus processing. Running it through a SSL bus compressor. Doing a pretty heavy amount of compression. I don't normally go above 4, but I honestly don't hate it. Let's turn both of these off and just listen to how it sounds without this compression. And then with it. It's a tiny bit louder. Let's bring that makeup gain down. And then without it. It's a little less focused with it on there, but it does kind of beefing things up. I feel like I say that a lot, but that's usually what I'm trying to do with my drums, is get them as beefy as possible. This is kind of squashing the dynamics just a little bit, but it is making everything kind of a lower, it's more focused in the low end. Let's hear that blast part without that compression. And with it. Just really glues everything together. I've talked about this trick almost in every single drum video. We just like our snares to be super hot, super loud, almost louder than the rest of the kit. And then I like to use compression to have that super aggressive sounding snare and then duck it down with a compressor to kind of match the volume of the rest of the kit. So without it. And with it. And I kind of want to go a little bit more in depth here on how much you can do with this. So if I bring this threshold down, we're only doing about 1.5 to 1 ratio. But if I crank this threshold, you notice that that snare really gets ducked down. So when I'm dialing this in, I'm trying to watch my gain reduction meter and I'm trying to look for it triggering pretty much only on the snare. It's okay if we get a little bit of kick in there. And I play with my release time. I'm doing a high pass filter over here just to kind of have it ignore some of that low end. That's with it. This is without it. So in this case, my snare actually was already at a pretty decent volume, but I still like to do this because it imparts a characteristic onto the snare that I just really love. It really rounds it off in just a really pleasant way. I think that's it for this in the whole kit here. But just real quick, let's go ahead and A/B unprocessed versus processed, and then kind of see what we did. Let's listen to that blast beat, or the faster part. And then with our processing. So yeah, you can get pretty fucking beefy results with this Perfect Drum program. As you can tell, just the raw files themselves weren't very flattering. If you have a good ear, you can notice that there are pretty much everything you need, at least for my taste and what I want out of my metal drums. It has so many selections, and I can really pick out the stuff I like pretty fucking easily, as to where I feel like a lot of other drum programs I've used, everything just kind of sounds bad to me. And then I have to work a lot of magic, as to where this, like I said, wasn't flattering out of the box. Let me just bypass everything again one more time. But I can hear that kick drum has a good click attack to it. It has a decent amount of low end. I feel like it's getting overshadowed by the mids and trebles, but I still like the low end I'm hearing. The snare, very ringy, but it's got a cool attack. The cymbals aren't very flattering either, but they're not offensive either. I actually really like the toms. I'm very picky with my toms, and I kind of like how those sounded raw. And then when you do those simple processing moves, everything just sounds massive. Let's take this one step further just for fun, and let's do some parallel compression. Send this to our drum PC that we just made. And we usually use the distressor, but let's try out DrumForge, or not DrumForge, sorry. This JST drum bus plugin. Bring it all the way down, bring the original drums back in. Bring it in. Then let's play with this punch knob. I dig that. Parallel compression is usually the final stage of my drum mix. I get everything how I'm wanting it, and then I just kind of do a parallel compression to just kind of add some life to the whole kit and some consistency and punch. That'll be it for today's video. Hopefully going to be doing Get Good Drums Brutal here very soon. My friend just bought it, and I talked him into coming over so I could make a video on it. So keep your eyes out for that. And if you guys have any other drum kits you want me to mix and kind of walk you through, just drop a comment down below. If you made it this far, I appreciate you, and I respect that you want to learn more. If you could do me a favor and like and subscribe, it would help my channel out a lot. But yeah. Hope you all have a good day.